The cemetery visit. Every year, Evelyn Mathers made the solemn journey to Greenwood Cemetery. It was a quiet place, nestled on the outskirts of town, where towering oaks and weeping willows whispered secrets to the gravestones below. The cemetery was vast, with old stone paths winding through neatly kept grass, a stark contrast to the chaotic tangle of emotions within Evelyn's heart. It had been 5 years since her husband, Robert, had passed away in a tragic accident. The memories of that day were still fresh, like an open wound that refused to heal. Evelyn's visits to his grave had become a ritual, a way to keep his memory alive and to seek some semblance of solace in her grief. As she approached the familiar plot, her steps slowed. Her heart pounded louder with each step, as it did every year. The gravestone, a simple yet elegant marble slab, stood out among the others. It bore Robert's name, his date of birth, and the date of his untimely death. But it was the name below his that always sent a chill down her spine. Evelyn Mathers, her own name, carved into the cold stone beneath his, with no date of death inscribed. She had discovered this eerie addition on her first visit after his funeral. It had unnerved her deeply, but after inquiries and complaints to the cemetery staff, she had been assured it was a mistake. Yet, no matter how many times she asked for it to be removed, the name remained. She knelt by the gravestone, placing a bouquet of fresh lilies at its base. Her fingers traced over Robert's name, and then, reluctantly, over her own. The smooth, cold surface felt like a harbinger of doom, a grim reminder of her own mortality. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, hoping for some connection to her lost love. The wind rustled the leaves around her, carrying with it a faint whisper. Evelyn shivered and looked around, but the cemetery was empty. She was alone with her thoughts and the dead. The first encounter. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the cemetery. Evelyn stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees, and made her way back to the car. As she walked, she felt an uneasy sensation, as though someone was watching her. She turned, but there was no one in sight. Shaking off the feeling, she quickened her pace. The car was a comforting sight in the distance, its metallic frame gleaming in the fading light. She fumbled with her keys, her hands trembling, and finally managed to unlock the door. As she slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, she glanced back at Robert's grave. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure standing beside it, but when she blinked, it was gone. Evelyn drove home in silence, the radio turned off, her mind replaying the strange occurrence. It must have been a trick of the light, she told herself. The grief was playing tricks on her mind. The letter. A week later, Evelyn received a letter in the mail. It was unmarked, with no return address. Curious, she opened it, and her heart sank as she read the contents. It was a message written in a familiar hand, Robert's hand. Dearest Evelyn, I know this letter will come as a shock to you, but please believe me when I say that I am with you always. I watch over you, protect you, and love you more than words can express. Do not fear the inscription on the gravestone. It is a reminder that we are bound together, in life and in death. Yours forever, Robert. Evelyn's hands shook as she reread the letter. It couldn't be possible. Robert was gone, and this had to be some cruel joke. But the handwriting was unmistakably his. She folded the letter and placed it in her drawer, trying to push the disturbing thoughts from her mind. The apparition. That night, Evelyn struggled to sleep. Her mind was plagued with thoughts of Robert and the unsettling letter. She tossed and turned, the shadows in her room seeming to move and shift. Around midnight, she finally drifted into a restless slumber. In her dreams, she was back at the cemetery. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the gravestones. She stood before Robert's grave, but this time, the inscription was different. It read, "Together in life, together in death." Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her. She turned slowly, and there stood Robert, his form translucent and shimmering in the moonlight. His eyes were sad, filled with longing and love. He reached out to her, his fingers brushing against her cheek. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice echoing through the still night air. "You must not fear. We will be together again." Evelyn woke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was dark, but she could feel the lingering presence of Robert. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered his name, feeling more alone than ever. The stranger. The following day, Evelyn decided to visit the cemetery caretaker. She needed answers about the mysterious inscription and the letters she had received. The caretaker, Mr. Harlan, was a grizzled old man with a kind face and a wealth of knowledge about the cemetery. As she explained her situation, Mr. Harlan listened intently, his brow furrowing in concern. When she finished, he sighed deeply. "Mrs. Mathers, I assure you, we have no record of adding your name to the gravestone. It must be some kind of mistake, but I will look into it again." Evelyn nodded, though she wasn't convinced. As she turned to leave, a young woman entered the caretaker's office. She was pale and thin, with dark circles under her eyes, as if she hadn't slept in days. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice trembling. "I'm looking for my brother's grave. He died recently, and I've been seeing strange things, messages from him." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. She introduced herself to the woman, whose name was Anna. As they spoke, they realized they had both been receiving letters from their deceased loved ones, letters written in their handwriting. The connection. Evelyn and Anna decided to investigate the cemetery together. They visited each other's homes, comparing the letters they had received. The similarities were uncanny, and they felt a deep connection to their lost loved ones. As they delved deeper, they discovered a series of old records and newspaper clippings about the cemetery. There had been other reports of mysterious inscriptions and ghostly apparitions, all connected to a tragic event that had occurred nearly a century ago. In the early 1900s, a fire had swept through the town, claiming many lives. Among the victims were a couple, John and Mary Whitmore, who were said to have been deeply in love. They were buried together in Greenwood Cemetery, and legend had it that their spirits lingered, seeking to reunite lost souls. Evelyn and Anna were determined to uncover the truth. They visited the gravesite of John and Mary Whitmore, hoping to find some clue. As they stood before the weathered gravestone, they felt a sudden chill in the air. The ritual. Evelyn and Anna continued their research, finding references to an old ritual that could help communicate with spirits. Desperate for answers, they decided to perform the ritual at the cemetery, hoping to make contact with their loved ones. Under the light of a full moon, they gathered the necessary items, candles, flowers, and personal mementos of Robert and Anna's brother. They stood before the gravestone of John and Mary Whitmore, feeling a mix of fear and hope. As they recited the incantation, the air grew colder, and the wind began to howl. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows across the gravestones. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled, and a ghostly figure appeared before them. It was Robert, his form more solid than before. He reached out to Evelyn, his eyes filled with sorrow and love. "Evelyn," he said, his voice echoing in the night. "I have been trying to reach you. There is something you must know." The revelation. Robert explained that the cemetery was a place of great power, where the veil between the living and the dead was thin. The spirits of John and Mary Whitmore had been trying to reunite lost souls, but their efforts had been misunderstood and feared. "The inscription on the gravestone," Robert said, "is not a curse. It is a promise. We are bound together, in life and in death. But you must not fear it. Embrace it, and you will find peace." Evelyn and Anna listened in awe, their fears slowly dissipating. They realized that their loved ones were not haunting them, but guiding them towards a deeper understanding of love and loss. As the ritual came to an end, Robert's form began to fade. He smiled at Evelyn, his eyes filled with a sense of peace. "Remember, Evelyn," he whispered, "I am always with you." The peace. In the days that followed, Evelyn felt a newfound sense of peace. The cemetery no longer seemed like a place of fear and sadness, but a sanctuary where she could connect with Robert. She visited often, bringing flowers and sitting by his grave, feeling his presence beside her. Anna, too, found solace in the knowledge that her brother was watching over her. The two women formed a strong bond, supporting each other through their grief and finding comfort in their shared experiences. The mysterious letters continued to arrive, but now they were a source of comfort rather than fear. Each one brought a message of love and reassurance, reminding Evelyn and Anna that they were never truly alone. The future. Years passed, and Evelyn's visits to the cemetery became a cherished part of her routine. She grew older, but the sense of connection she felt with Robert remained strong. She often thought about the inscription on the gravestone, and the promise it held. One crisp autumn day, as Evelyn sat by Robert's grave, she felt a familiar presence beside her. She smiled, knowing that Robert was there, watching over her as always. As the sun set and the shadows grew longer, Evelyn whispered a prayer of thanks. She had found peace in the knowledge that love transcended death, and that she would one day be reunited with Robert. And as the wind rustled the leaves and the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Evelyn felt a deep sense of gratitude for the love that had bound them together, in life and in death.
Dear viewers, if you like to watch the scariest horror stories, do subscribe, like and share our channel. Thank you.